All right, today we're going to learn a little bit about Africa. We've talked a little bit about Africa already. In the first unit, we talked a little bit about the ways in which early peoples had originated in that area. We're going to fast forward a little bit and get right into some of the geography of the region and how that's going to impact people. And then we'll talk about some of the early societies and cultures and civilizations that rose up in Africa. When we look at Africa, one of the first things we need to keep in mind is the size of it, the enormity of it. It's an extremely large continent, and as you can see by the map here, it's large enough to incorporate several different large nations in the world today. And this is going to have a big impact on a lot of different things when we talk about Africa, but in particular when we talk about trade, when we talk about communication, the diversity of the people, the diversity of the languages and the religious beliefs and the societal and cultural practices are all going to be impacted simply by the size of this continent. One of the key features and problems that they face in Africa is going to be something called desertification. There are several different deserts within the African continent, the largest one being the Sahara. And one of the biggest problems they face is the fact that these deserts are continuing to grow annually. Every year, these deserts get a little bit bigger, they grow a little bit more. And some of the causes, as you can see here, include things like overuse, that is kind of over using too much agricultural product, perhaps cattle grazing with the overgrazing part, and then cutting down trees for lumber and for burning. What this does is it leaves the land pretty much barren, and there's nothing to really root down and hold that soil into place, which then allows the desert to grow into those areas. Some of the things that different societies and villages and cities have really worked with as far as solutions are things like crop rotation. The idea of crop rotation is simply that you let a crop go fallow or unused for a year. What that does is it allows the soil to replenish with nutrients as you fertilize it during that year and then rotate on to another section of your land. Terracing, creating kind of agricultural abilities and farming on hillsides or mountains, which can then leave that land so that you're not utilizing it. And then the creation of something called tree belts, which is where they plant trees in order to provide some kind of barrier. What happens is the roots in the trees dig down into the soil and it holds the soil in place as the trees continue to grow, and it prevents the soil from converting over into desert. One of the largest geographic areas of Africa is something called the Sahel, and it's really kind of a border area between the Sahara Desert and the southern parts of Africa, which would include rainforests and some other areas. This is primarily a big grassland, slightly forested throughout this region. The other major area is going to be the savanna. So the savanna is the primary grassland that you're probably used to, probably from movies like The Lion King and other movies where you get this whole idea of a large, flat grassland, sparsely populated, a lot of animal life. This is the area also where some of the earliest examples of man are going to rise up. The African rainforest, which is going to be primarily through the equatorial area of Africa. This includes areas along the countries of Benin and Niger, but also the African Republic of Congo. This is a really thick, dense area. This area has been difficult, even to this day, for navigation on any of the rivers because they're in a mountainous region, but also just due to vegetation for exploration by outside people. The tallest mountain in Africa is Mount Kilimanjaro. It's 19,000 feet high. As you can see, there's snow at the top, even though it's located in Africa due to its height, its elevation. It's still cold enough there that they do get snow year round. These are some of the major geographic themes that we have to talk about. Different things that have an impact on Africa and the people. The first one is the fact that fertile soil along the Nile River encouraged the development of ancient Egypt. This soil created one of the earliest civilizations. Now, we didn't talk about Egypt when we did our early civilizations because you covered that, I believe, in sixth grade. But that region is going to be one of the first to really develop, and it really has a lot to do with the fact that there was fertile soil in this area and a means for transportation and trade zones with other civilizations. A lot of the geographic features in this area have also prevented trade. As much as rivers like the Nile have provided the ability to trade products, and access to the Mediterranean has allowed that to happen as well, there are also a lot of geographic features that have prevented trade. The deserts in and of themselves provide a barrier. The highlands throughout the central part of Africa, the dense vegetation of the rainforests also provide barriers. These barriers also go on to promote cultural diversity. We have a lot of different cultural practices in Africa, a lot of different tribal groups, a lot of different ethnic groups throughout most of Africa. And a lot of it has to do with, again, the size of Africa, but also the geographic factors like the deserts and the mountains and the rainforests that have separated people. And they've developed very unique cultural practices, ways of life, and languages. The major physical features throughout this area include the Sahara, a smooth coastline which prevents any real natural ports. Part of this led to the fact that the African continent was pretty much unnavigable for a long period of time. Also, the fact that they didn't really set up any kind of major imperialism throughout this region, partly because of this smooth coastline. The lack of navigable rivers, the fact that beyond the Nile and maybe the Niger River, there really aren't a lot of large rivers that are navigable. And then the idea of the Great Rift Valley, which is where humankind first got its start. The result of these physical features, we have more than 800 different spoken languages throughout the African continent, a lot of different religious practices, a lot of different beliefs. Most of them are centered around animism, the idea that spirits inhabit animals, and that these animals have an impact on you, or these spirits have an impact on you on your daily life, and a lack of exploration or contact. As we'll see later on in this unit, exploration of Africa was really limited to the coastline for an extremely long period of time, and it's not until the mid to late 1800s that Africa becomes kind of a central focus of the European powers and some of the resources that they have in this region. Finally, Africa's many raw materials and natural resources did lead to this what we call the scramble for Africa, when Europeans started to look at gaining access to these features and these resources. This led to the division of the continent into several colonies, which again had a major impact in the later development of independent states in Africa, and has a really major impact in how Africa operates and functions today. All right, so that does it for the geography of Africa. We'll pick up in the next video with some of the early civilizations, cultural practices, religious beliefs, and the impacts of those on Africa as it developed.